Welcome to On the Moneyliner podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm back after the 1 week break to break down UFC 310. It's a 1 week break that I didn't realise we were actually going to get until a couple of days after I recorded the last podcast for UFC Macau. So yeah, we've had a 1 week break. We've only got 2 events left in the UFC for 2024, and this one's a bit of a low-key banger as well for a pay-per-view. So, of course, for a pay-per-view, it's supposed to be a banger, but I really don't think it's getting the credit that it deserves. I think the card's going to be absolutely fire pretty much from top to bottom, from the first fight of the night. I think we're gonna have a lot of really good fights here. Of course, we've got the old gloves back, so the old gloves are the new gloves. Everyone's getting hit hard again. Knockouts are becoming more frequent again since we've seen the new gloves back in the UFC. Well, like I say, the old gloves being the new gloves back into the UFC, and things are just so much better. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to Saturday night. I think it's going to be an outstanding card. One that I think I'm going to have to watch a little bit on my phone for the start. I'm at one of the regional UK events on Saturday night, but I will be catching the fights in between the fights that I'm watching live where I am, and then of course I'll catch up with the rest of the card once that event's done. Now, as always, before we get into the breakdowns, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend from a betting perspective, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for absolutely every type of gambler, whether you're a gambler with your own thoughts that you just want a little bit of help and advice to either back up your own thoughts or maybe pass on a bet. We've got a recommended bet section with full written breakdowns for you guys. If you are a fun gambler that likes the long shot parlays, likes to build your own parlays, or maybe you're lazy and you want pre-built parlays, we've got you guys covered as well. Or if you're just somebody that likes to follow the official bets from the handicapper, which is myself, where my money is going on each fight that I bet, then we have got a recommended bet section within the betting hub on the website as well. And of course, every single subscription comes with Base AI, our UFC prediction software, where you'll get a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight on every UFC card. That's win, loss, that's knockout, submission, decision on both sides, and then that's round 1 knockout, round 2 knockout, round 3 knockout, 4 and 5 for co-main event, featured fights and championship fights and main events, and the same for submissions as well, and the same for both sides of the fight. So that's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, let's get down to breaking some fights. And of course, we start in the main event. As we always do, it's a championship fight in the flyweight division. We've got Alexandre Pantoja versus the newcomer Kai Asakura. And this is a really interesting fight, and it's always more interesting when a UFC debutant comes in and has a title fight for the first fight. And I'll be honest, I haven't really done my research for what I'm about to say, but I'm wondering how many times this has happened before. I'm pretty sure it has happened before, but it can't be too many times where somebody's come into the UFC and just had a title fight straight off the bat on the first fight within the promotion. So it's definitely a very rare occurrence. It's a special occurrence, and what's more interesting is Kai Asakura, he's coming from Rising, but he hasn't fought at flyweight in Rising. He was a bantamweight. And in fact, as a professional mixed martial artist, he's never fought at flyweight either. Now, you can go a little bit further back. You look at his amateur record. He's got an extensive amateur record as well, by the way. And I think he fought at flyweight when he was like 5, 6, 7 and 0 as an amateur. So he has fought at flyweight before, but it's going to be interesting. Like I say, it was a long time ago since he's fought at flyweight. He's not a 25, 26-year-old that's, probably going to have a little bit of an easier time getting down to flyweight either. He's 31 years old, but I'm on the side of, I don't think that he would have signed to a flyweight championship fight, and the UFC wouldn't have signed him to a flyweight championship fight on your UFC debut if all parties weren't 100% sure that he was going to be able to make the weight. It's a little bit like when Kayla Harrison moved from PFL to the UFC. Kayla was huge in the PFL, and I think she came down 2 weight classes to get into the UFC, because I'm sure at PFL she was a lightweight, and then the UFC don't have a featherweight division, so she had to come in at bantamweight. I'm sure it was that process, and there were a lot of people questioning that, but again, I thought exactly the same thing. Like, I don't feel like the athlete would have signed to come into the UFC at that specific weight class when they're already a star and a known name elsewhere if they can't make the weight. So that's the last I'm going to say on the weight for Kai Asakura. I do think he'll make flyweight. Like I say, I'd be very shocked if all parties made this specific fight happen, a championship fight on your UFC debut when you're a multi-time rising champion, in Japan. I really don't think they'd have made this fight if they weren't sure that the weight was going to be made. So I'm gonna, put a pin in that for now. I don't think it's going to be that relevant. I think Kai Asakura will make weight. I think the championship fight will go ahead on Saturday night. But as for how they match up, I mean, at this point, most UFC fans know exactly who Alexandre Pantoja is, what he's about. He's a very reckless fighter, but it's technical recklessness, if that makes sense. And it probably doesn't make sense in regards to the phrasing that I've used, but he knows what he's doing when he's coming forwards. He's not exactly coming forwards, exchanging dangerously and leaving his chin open to be cracked. Like, he knows what he's doing, but his style does come across as reckless. He'll crash into the pocket striking, knowing that his opponent won't take him down or try to take him down. And if they do try and take him down, then he's cool with that. Pantoja is an elite BJJ player, so if he gets put on his back, he's got no problems in regards to either threatening with submissions, sweeping his opponent to get in a better position on the mat himself, or standing back up to his feet. So that's the type of style that Pantoja's got, just in a nutshell. Now, from Kai Asakura's side, this dude is super fast. He's a power striker. We've all seen that clip of the X-ray from Ulka Sasaki in regards to when Kai Asakura fought him. He broke his jaw, and the X-ray looked absolutely disgusting. So we know that Asakura's got knockout power. Now, that's knockout power in the bantamweight division. It's going to be really interesting to see how that affects him coming down in weight to flyweight. Does he carry that power down? Because if he does, then we could have a really interesting fight for as long as this fight is standing. But then that's where the problem becomes, because I think Pantoja's got an absolutely huge gap in skill here when it comes to the grappling. I think he's going to be light years ahead of Asakura, and if the fight does hit the mat, then Pantoja, I think, is going to absolutely roll on him. I think he'll be able to take his back. I think he's got a good chance of submitting him. I think whilst the fight is standing, I think Asakura's got every chance of hurting Pantoja and knocking him out, especially, again, coming back to the fact that we're using the old UFC gloves now as well. And, the knockout rate on those gloves, those gloves just hit harder. Like, that's a fact. And I think that benefits somebody like Asakura in this type of fight. But that's the big question comes, does Pantoja get this fight down to the mat? And you would have to say yes, and I was leaning towards yes. However, I did see a clip a couple of days ago. I think it was on Diakise's Facebook page, and I saw a clip of Asakura and Merab Dvalishvili in the cage training. Dvalishvili was spamming takedowns on Asakura. Now, Asakura was looking like he was scrambling well. He looked like he was sprawling well, defending these takedowns really well. But then it's how much stock do you put in that slight training video? And also, the other thing you've got to consider is they will be other training sessions, and there'll be other factors that have come into those two training together that hasn't been released to the public. So is there another video out there of Dvalishvili taking him down 100 times and they've just snipped the bit where Asakura is doing well? Then you've got to consider, Dvalishvili is obviously a beast when it comes to wrestling and securing takedowns, but was he going 100% in the cage like he would in a fight himself? Probably not. And then you've got to consider, look, I don't think Pantoja's going to be shooting single legs and double legs on Kai Asakura. I think it's going to be one of them where, he's closing the distance, pushing Asakura's back against the cage, and then looking to either sneak around the back or reap a leg out. I think it's going to be those types of takedowns, like more jiu-jitsu style takedowns than your raw traditional wrestling style takedowns, like your single legs, your double legs, out in the open cage. So again, I know it was me that brought up the training video that I saw, which again was very interesting. Like, it did look like Kai Asakura definitely had, the sprawls and the scrambles down to a T, but it's going to be different inside the cage. I think that when you ask yourself the question, does Pantoja get this fight down to the mat, and can he do it in at least 3 out of 5 rounds? Then yes, I think he can, and I don't think he might even need to go to that 3 rounds if he's getting the takedowns as and when he wants them, because I think, look, if Pantoja's coming in there and he gets a couple of takedowns early, maybe he doesn't finish Asakura straight away, but if he gets another couple of takedowns in another round, then the more takedowns he's getting, the longer the fight goes on, the more likely it is for Pantoja to find a submission when Kai Asakura is a little bit tired and maybe he's a little bit deflated from not being able to get his striking going on the feet. And I think it's going to be one of those types of fights. But make no mistake about it, while these guys are striking on the feet, don't be surprised if Asakura lands something on Pantoja, drops him, hurts him, or knocks him out. I promise you, don't be surprised. But in my opinion, the way I'm seeing this fight is I think there's going to be more to this fight than Asakura just landing on Pantoja, knocking him out, and then winning the belt. I think there is going to be an MMA fight going on. I do think there's going to be takedowns. I do think Pantoja's going to have some really good positions on the mat. And I do think that the gap in skill, like, it's light years. Pantoja's grappling is light years ahead of Asakura's, and I think it's going to be really dangerous with Asakura on his back, with Pantoja on top of him, and I do see those scenarios playing out in the fight, and for that reason, I have to side with the champion Pantoja. So, for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Alexandre Pantoja to win this fight, and still the UFC flyweight champion. And in the next fight in the co-main event, this is going to be a fun one and an interesting one for a lot of different angles. We've got Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Garry. Now, this was supposed to be, or at least for Shavkat, it was supposed to be the main event. We were supposed to have Belal Muhammad versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Rakhmonov finally getting his UFC championship opportunity to win the belt. And unfortunately, Belal Muhammad has pulled out. It's not one of them where, look, Belal doesn't just pull out of fights, and it's not often he pulls out of fights. It's a legitimate injury, and one I'm sure he'll be back soon and defending his belt sooner rather than later, which I hope is the case, because in my opinion, we are just delaying the inevitable of Shavkat Rakhmonov becoming the UFC welterweight champion. I think he's the best fighter in the division. It's not a down talk on Belal Muhammad. I think Belal Muhammad is a phenomenal fighter. I think he's a fighter that's improved so much over the years to the point where, he's actually elite in every aspect of MMA. It's just, I think Shavkat Rakhmonov is better in every area, and I think that he's going to be better than every other fighter in the division. I think he's the best fighter in the division as of right now, and I think it's just a case of, just waiting till he can prove it. And first things first, he's got Garry ahead of him here, and look, Garry's a great fighter. He's a fighter that I've spoke about very highly for a very long time. His first amateur fight, I watched him. I've watched all his fights, and I've seen his entire career from that first amateur fight. So he's a fighter that, like I say, I know a lot about. I've seen the development from the regional scene all the way up into the UFC, now a UFC ranked fighter. And look, if Garry can upset Rakhmonov here, then it's Garry versus Belal Muhammad, which I actually think, that's a better fight, a much better fight for Belal Muhammad, having Garry win here and then defending the belt against him. But, Garry's got a mountain to climb himself, because, like I say, in my opinion, Rakhmonov's the best fighter in the division. He's just so advanced absolutely everywhere. Rakhmonov's striking is... It's clean, it's sharp, it's not sloppy, he doesn't wing too many overhands and gets reckless in exchanges. Everything's clean, everything's crisp. He's got super deceptive power as well, because he's got one of these taller, longer frames rather than a short, stocky frame. But like I said, the power's really deceptive in the straight punches, but then you go a little bit further into the punches and you've got the Muay Thai, his knees are good, his elbows are good, and then you start looking at his wrestling defensively, very good, and then he's got good offensive wrestling on the mat. He's difficult to deal with, his grappling's world class. So you've got a fighter in Shavkat that offensively is great everywhere, but more importantly, defensively is great everywhere. And even though I think he beats Belal Muhammad, I don't think he absolutely completely and utterly demolishes him, like, it'll be a very good fight. Like, it'll be competitive for the majority of the fight. It's just, I think Rakhmonov is just a step ahead of every fighter in the division. And to beat Rakhmonov, like I say, you've got to get through that defense and you've got to be able to attack. But it's like, from me and Garry's perspective, yeah, Garry's been doing some work in Brazil. He's been working with, I believe, Damian Maia, or at least he was for his last fight against Michael Venom Page. And then, like I say, from a grappling perspective, Garry's never been bad either. In fact, from a fighter, from an overall fighter perspective, Garry's well-rounded himself. He's a good striker. He can wrestle and he can grapple. He's got it all as well. But it's like, where does he get at Rakhmonov? Because if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, because, by the way, this co-main event's a featured one. It's 5 rounds. I forgot to mention that. So, again, that adds another interesting aspect to it. But if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, I think Rakhmonov's just the better striker. I think he's going to land the better shots, the harder shots, and I think he might end up finishing Ian Garry, again, if it's a 25-minute kickboxing fight. But then, when we're mixing the wrestling and grappling, and I think Rakhmonov's just the better wrestler and grappler. Is Garry going to get Rakhmonov down? No, I really don't think he is. But I suppose in MMA you can never really say never. So what happens if Garry does get him down? Well, I don't think Garry rolls on him. I think, Rakhmonov can get right back up to his feet and then maybe re-wrestle at Garry and get him down. Then if you're looking at who's the more trustworthy fighter from a top perspective on the mat, well, I think, like I've just said, I think if Garry gets on top of Rakhmonov, Rakhmonov gets back up. But I think if Rakhmonov gets on top of Garry, he can do some good work. And again, I'm not saying Garry can't get back up to his feet. But I think if he does get back up to his feet, he's going to have to work super hard for it. And then don't be surprised if Rakhmonov keeps a hold of him and takes him down again. And again, Rakhmonov isn't like a relentless wrestler either. So he's going to be able to blend the striking with the wrestling really easily. More fluently, shall I say, not easily. I don't think it's going to be an easy fight for Rakhmonov. That'd be disrespectful to Garry, because Garry is an elite fighter. But I think Rakhmonov, he's going to fluidly blend the attack to the takedowns really well over the 25 minutes, if we need the full 25 minutes, and just be able to mix things up and have a lot of success in this fight. And then that's the other thing. If we don't go 25 minutes, well, that means there's a finish. So who's the more likely fighter to finish? Who's got the finishing upside? Well, I think that's Rakhmonov. Again, I think he hits harder, and I think he's the more likely fighter to do the better work on the mat. So from a submission perspective, I think he's more likely for a submission as well. I just think that maybe, look, this is a good step up for Ian Garry, and a step up that A, he needs, and B, he deserves. But I think that at this stage in Garry's career, I think Garry might just be one fight too short of really pushing for that title shot. And I genuinely believe that Garry will have that title shot at some point in the UFC. I just don't think it's going to be from this fight. I think this is a fight that Ian Garry is going to bring the best out of Rakhmonov, and we're going to see a Rakhmonov that looks like he's leveled up a lot and ready for this Belal Muhammad title fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Shavkat Rakhmonov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're in the heavyweight division. We've got a rematch as well. We've got Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov 2. Now, in regards to how this fight plays out, from a stylistic perspective, I don't think we're going to see too much difference from the first time that they both fought. The only real difference, the main difference is the last time they fought was a 5-round main event, whereas now they've got 3 rounds instead of the 5. And Ciryl Gane won that 5-round main event by unanimous decision over 5 rounds, and he just put a technical clinic on Alexander Volkov. Because, look, for as tall and long as Volkov is, he's actually a decent technical striker as well, but there's always levels in this game, and I think that Ciryl Gane is just a level above Volkov when it comes to the technical striking, and it showed over 5 rounds last time out. Volkov didn't have too many moments. Gane just looked in complete control throughout the entire fight, and the thing is, Volkov's style hasn't changed. Ciryl Gane's style hasn't changed. I don't think Ciryl Gane is light years better than what he was when he fought Volkov. And the same for Volkov as well. I think they're pretty much the exact same fighter. And like I say, the rematching, it's a bit of a strange rematch, because it's, like I say, it's not as if it was like a fight where they were both knocking, dropping each other all over, and there was nearly multiple finishes over 5 rounds, and it was close, back and forth, split decision, could have gone either way. It wasn't that type of fight. Ciryl Gane just put a striking clinic on Volkov and won comfortably by unanimous decision over 5 rounds. So it's a bit of a strange rematch. And again, it's not as if they've both developed and they're both different versions of themselves. It's just like I say, we've got 2 rounds less this time. So maybe with the fact that there's not 5 rounds and they don't have to, save that energy for rounds 4 and 5, maybe they come out a little bit harder. Maybe they put a little bit more sting behind the punches, trying to, expend more energy early, which will then in turn create a more entertaining and exciting fight from, an electricity perspective, really putting it on each other. Maybe we see that, but again, I'm kind of leaning the other way on that as well. I do think it's going to be, again, another chess match type of striking fight where they're both going to have, some good moments. But I just don't know if Volkov has enough moments to be able to beat Gane. I think if he was able to beat Gane, I think he would have made that last fight much closer and much more competitive. So, look, we are in the heavyweight division again. Once again, we're using the old UFC gloves, so they're going to hit a little bit harder. So maybe Volkov does put more sting behind the punches. Maybe Volkov comes with a different approach in this fight, making some adjustments from his last fight. But I just don't see a different fight. Both fighters are pretty much exactly the same. The styles haven't changed. They've not really developed or declined. I think they're in pretty much the same spot. It's just, I think last time we got 5 rounds. I think we see the same fight this time, just with 2 rounds less. So, yeah, I'd be surprised if Volkov won this fight. And for those reasons, I'm picking Ciryl Gane to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie. Now, I kind of feel like this is a little bit of a mismatch, if I'm being honest. Like, Kron Gracie is 5-2. He signed to the UFC 5 years ago. He's only had 3 fights. He won his debut, but then he's lost 2 since. And then he had a massive layoff from that second loss to the third loss. Nobody really know where he'd gone, what he'd been doing in that time off. And like I say, he came back, he lost, and then that was now a year ago. So now he's back again after another year off. And I don't know, it's really difficult to understand where he's at and even why the UFC have made this matchup, because look, if you want to speculate, maybe he's coming to the end of his UFC contract and he just needs that last fight for the UFC to let him do what he wants to do. I don't know. It's a difficult one to, like I say, to speculate, and there might be a couple of different reasons for the matchup. Now, with Bryce Mitchell, like I say, he's 16-2 versus the 5-2 of Kron Gracie. And obviously in the UFC, records don't always mean everything. And, we've seen that with somebody like Alex Pereira, who came into the UFC, quite green from an MMA perspective, and look at where he is now. But yeah, look, maybe the only way that Kron Gracie has a real chance of winning, the only way he has a real chance of winning this fight is if the fight gets down to the mat, and Bryce Mitchell likes to wrestle and grapple, but Mitchell can also strike as well. So it's going to be kind of, in my opinion, it's going to be on Bryce Mitchell. It's Bryce Mitchell's decision of where this fight takes place, because Kron Gracie will, of course, want to get it down to the mat, so he'll be looking to try and get takedowns and get on top of Mitchell. But I'm not convinced that Kron Gracie can take Bryce Mitchell down at all. I think it's going to all be on Mitchell's terms, and because of that, Mitchell's going to have options here. I think that from a striking perspective, Mitchell's the better striker than Kron Gracie, unless Kron Gracie comes in with some crazy developed striking that we haven't seen in the last couple of years. But Bryce Mitchell, at least from the footage we've seen, is going to be the better striker, and is the better wrestler offensively and defensively as well. So again, that's the reason why I think it's going to all be on Mitchell's terms, because if Mitchell wants to take the fight down, then I think he'll do so. And look, I don't think Gracie would be able to defend Mitchell's takedowns if he comes in with a takedown heavy game, and I don't think Gracie would probably want to defend them anyway. I think he'd be more than happy with Mitchell trying to take him down, because that's where Kron Gracie is going to have opportunities in this fight. But I think with Bryce Mitchell on top of Kron Gracie, I don't think that Kron Gracie is like light years ahead of Mitchell on the mat, where he's going to submit him off his back or sweep and reverse him. I think Mitchell is more than good enough from a topside jiu-jitsu perspective, and with his wrestling as well, to maybe re-wrestle within a scramble should Kron Gracie look like he's going to sweep or something like that. I think that Mitchell's more than good enough on top to just remain at least safe and run the clock down and, do some work on top of Gracie. I don't think Mitchell submits Gracie either, for what it's worth, but I just think that as long as Mitchell minds his P's and Q's and he doesn't make a stupid, unforced error on the mat that allows Gracie to grab a hold of an arm or submit him or capitalise on that mistake, I think Mitchell will be more than fine on top of Gracie. Then that's if the fight goes down to the mat. I wouldn't be shocked to see Mitchell coming in here and thinking, right, my wrestling's good, I'm going to use it defensively only, I'm going to stop the takedowns and light Gracie up on the feet, maybe get myself a knockout. I just think it's a difficult fight to pick Kron Gracie to win, because if Kron Gracie wins, it's going to be off the back of an unforced error, or it's just going to be off the back of a flash moment. The low percentage outcomes. I don't think Gracie wins this fight at a high clip at all. And I think Bryce Mitchell's got all the tools to, again, if he's in danger, to just remain safe. That's the key thing for him. Get back to his feet where he can strike. I just think that Mitchell's the better mixed martial artist. I think he's got more ways to win. I do think he can win on top of Gracie, stay safe. And again, from a striking perspective, I think he could probably get a knockout as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bryce Mitchell to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the always entertaining Nate the Train Landwehr versus Doo Ho Choi. And I think this is really, really good matchmaking. Like, my initial thoughts was with Nate Landwehr that, look, Landwehr's an absolute tank. Like, he'll eat 10 shots if it means just having an opportunity to land a big shot himself. Super hard to get him discouraged in the fight. And even when he fought Dan Ige, like, Dan Ige's at the top of the division, and Dan Ige beat him unanimously. Like, it was, it was a fight that was clear, but it was also a fight that was super competitive as well. And Landwehr had Ige busted up a little bit. Landwehr was busted up himself. Like, it was a back and forth fight with a very respectable fighter in the division in Dan Ige. And then the fight after Dan Ige, again, in his last fight, Landwehr comes out there and gets a knockout against Jamal Emmers in round one, which, on paper is super impressive. But again, you go back, you look at the fight, Landwehr's in a little bit of a war. Landwehr gets hurt and really badly hurt himself from Jamal Emmers and has to, again, sort of recover and weather a storm with Jamal Emmers trying to get the better of him and trying to actually get Landwehr out of there. And what does Landwehr do? He weathers the storm. His durability's, very, very good. And he ends up coming back out there and breaks Jamal Emmers by allowing Jamal Emmers to try and break him. It's just, Landwehr's a really, really entertaining fighter to watch. So again, when I come into watching tape on this fight, I thought, well, Landwehr should absolutely steamroll Doo Ho Choi. But here's the thing with Doo Ho Choi. So before Doo Ho Choi's last fight, obviously he had the military, the Korean military service, which is, mandatory for South Koreans. And Doo Ho Choi was out for a number of years. I think it was 4 years. And at one point, before Doo Ho Choi's last fight against Bill Algeo, he was coming off a draw, and at that point, that was 2023, he hadn't won a fight in 7 years. 7 years he'd not won a fight. And obviously, you add the Korean military service in those 7 years as well, but facts are facts. Doo Ho Choi had not won a fight in 7 years before fighting Bill Algeo, which is just crazy. Like, the Korean Superboy came into the UFC as this young hyper prospect that packed a load of power for his weight class and his frame. Everybody was super excited, but then suddenly he goes on a few fights losing streak, and then he takes a little bit of time off. Then he goes into the military service in Korea, and suddenly he comes back into the UFC. He's now 31. He's no longer that young hyper prospect that's going to be allowed a lot of time to develop. And you just wonder if we really missed the boat on Doo Ho Choi. But then he comes into this fight with Bill Algeo last time out. And again, if you go back and listen to my breakdown in that fight, like, there's just so many question marks and red flags over Doo Ho Choi of what he's going to look like. And again, all the things that I've just said, not won a fight in 7 years. The draw against Kyle Nelson wasn't really a good look either. You expected somebody who is supposed to be as high level as Doo Ho Choi to be able to get through Kyle Nelson, and he didn't. But again, maybe you can just give Doo Ho Choi a little bit of a pass on that, with it being his first fight back from the Korean military service and the fact that he hasn't won in, again, 7 years. So, he comes into this fight with Bill Aljo, and man, Duo Choi looks good. Like, he's striking sharp, it's on point. We're now seeing new wrinkles in his game. He's getting takedowns on Bill Aljo. Bill Aljo was supposed to be the wrestler and grappler in that fight. And of course, he did get Duo Choi down a couple of times, but Choi got back up to his feet. It was Choi that was landing takedowns then on Bill Aljo, and Choi was looking like he was doing decent work on the mat. Of course, you've got the Korean Zombie in his corner. In my opinion, the Korean Zombie is one of the most underrated BJJ players that the UFC has ever seen. And what I'm saying is he's not the best that the UFC has ever seen. I just mean he's underrated. Like, people saw the Korean Zombie as this crazy, entertaining striker, but the dude had a slick grappling game. And I've got a feeling that he's passed some of those skills over to Duo Choi. So, yeah, and look, Duo Choi, like I say, he was the one that was landing good strikes. He was the one that was landing takedowns on Bill Aljo, and again, showing a different element to his game before then knocking Bill Aljo out in round 2. So, like, that was, again, I've come into tape and I'm thinking, well, Nate Landwehr's gonna roll over Duo Choi and steamroll him. But I just, when you watch Choi, it's hard to see Nate Landwehr doing that, convincingly. Like, is it possible Nate Landwehr does that? Well, yes, because we've seen it so many times before. But when you look at how you stop a fighter like Nate Landwehr that's constantly going to be coming forwards and putting the pressure on, well, you stop him by either knocking him out or just consistently landing hard shots, mixing in a little bit of a takedown game to break that flow of striking up as well. And I think Duo Choi can do all that. So I actually think it's going to be a really, really close fight because, like I say, I'm not going to be surprised if Choi lands some hard shots early on Landwehr, drops him, Landwehr, recovers, comes back, puts the pressure on and breaks Choi later down the fight. Like, that won't shock me at all. But it also won't shock me to see Choi leveling up again. And 31, remember, is not old. That's like prime now in MMA. Like, prime maybe 5 or 6 years ago was probably maybe 28, 29, but fighters are fighting much longer now. So 31's around the prime age, and I just wouldn't be shocked to see Choi just put on a clinic here and potentially knock Landwehr out and get him out of there. And even if he doesn't knock him out, could I see Choi just getting a knockdown in 2 rounds and winning the round based off the knockdowns? I could see that as well. So it's a super close fight. And for that reason, more often than not, I do normally side with picking the underdog in these close fights, which in this case is Choi. For those reasons, I'm picking Duo Choi to win this fight. And in the next fight in the light heavyweight division, we've got Anthony Smith versus Dominick Reyes. Now, initially, I thought this was probably going to be quite closely lined. And I'd be thinking, well, okay, yeah, Dominick Reyes in a close line fight. I kind of like him here, especially coming off the fight that he just had last time against Dustin Jacoby. But as I'm looking at the line now, like, it's minus 300 for Dominick Reyes. And I kind of feel like the bookies have been smart with that because they've not allowed much room for people to come in and go heavy on Dominick Reyes because there is always that risk, especially with him. Like I say, I know he looked really great last time out, but prior to that, he was getting knocked out constantly. It looked like his durability was absolutely crushed as well. So you've still got that in the back of your mind when, even if you're thinking about laying anything down on someone that's minus 300. But on the flip side, it's like, do you really want to take Anthony Smith as an underdog, especially watching how Dominick Reyes destroyed Jacoby last time out? It's not as if Smith is one of these young fighters that has got this crazy explosive power and that is on his way up. Smith's an aging fighter as well. His record's 37-20. He's had 57 professional MMA fights. Like, he's not far off from, the tail end of his career. So it's one of these where, like I say, it's been lined really smartly because at minus 300, I don't think it offers too much that's that tempting. But on Smith's side, is he an underdog that you want to take? I think there's better underdog spots on this card. So, yeah, it's from a betting perspective, I think they've got it perfect. And from a straight pick prediction, like I've already said, there's still question marks on Dominick Reyes' durability. Like, it's not as if Dustin Jacoby cracked him hard a number of times over a couple of rounds and then Dominick Reyes came out and smashed him afterwards. Like, it was just a demolition job from Dominick Reyes. He came in there like a wrecking ball and didn't really give Dustin Jacoby much chance to land anything on him. So there's still the question marks on the durability issues. It's just, yeah, Smith can hit hard, of course he can, but you know, is Smith going to be the one? Is Smith just going to walk in there, land a shot on Reyes and fold him? Like, I just don't think so. I think Reyes is going to be the one that's aggressive. I definitely think he's aggressive here after what happened last time out, because as soon as he steps in that cage, all he's going to remember is his last fight in coming forwards. And look, Dustin Jacoby's he was a high-level kickboxer as well. So for Reyes to take him out in the way he did was super impressive. And again, that's all he's going to remember. So again, I think Reyes is going to come in here and he's going to put it on Anthony Smith. And I think that Smith at this stage in his career, he can be got at a little bit when he's overwhelmed and he's dealing with a lot of hard shots. And I think it's another good fight for Dominick Reyes to get in the cage and put back-to-back wins together and potentially back-to-back knockouts as well. Like I say, for Smith to win, yes, he could crack Reyes and bring those durability issues back, but when he's on the back foot with Reyes coming at him fast and hard, I just think it's going to be another early KO from Reyes. If it's not, and Smith's allowed to fight himself and build into the fight, then it becomes a little bit closer. But again, still in a technical back and forth fight that's, you know, not got too much action, I still think Dominick Reyes probably lands the better shots and wins on points as well. So yeah, look, I'm not going to be shocked if Smith wins, just for the reasons that I've mentioned, and he is going to be the better grappler as well. So if he gets on top of Reyes, then I think Smith's going to have advantages there. So it's not as if Smith doesn't have advantages in this fight. It's just the way I see the fight playing out, I think favours Reyes. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dominick Reyes to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a really interesting fight here. We've got Vicente Luque versus Themba Gorimbo. Now, I've got a funny feeling that Vicente Luque is going to be everybody's favourite underdog on this card. And you can already see that money's come in on Luque. Like, Themba Gorimbo was out at like -200, -210. I think now he's come all back in and you can get him for as cheap as like -150 now. So I already had the idea in my head that Vicente Luque was going to be a very popular underdog, and the line movement backs that up as well. And like I say, Themba Gorimbo could have been had at like -200, -210. Now you can get him at -150. So yeah, the money's coming on Luque, and I kind of feel that we see more of that happening throughout fight week. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this fight came in very close to a pick'em. I think I just don't know what it is with Themba Gorimbo. Everybody seems to want to fade him, doesn't trust him moving forwards. For me, what I see is a fighter that's developing from fight to fight, that's looking better each time out, that's a stud athlete, that's got good cardio from a wrestling heavy base as well. Like, it's not as if he's just standing and striking. Like, yeah, he gets a little bit tired towards the end of fights, but the amount that he wrestles is just crazy. Like, it's relentless wrestling. He doesn't stop. It's going to take your toll on your gas tank, unless you call Merab Dvalishvili that can seemingly do it for like 150 rounds and not get tired at one little bit. Like, you're going to get tired with that style. So I don't think that Gorimbo's got bad cardio. In fact, if anything, I think he's got really good cardio, especially considering his style. And like I say, he's a fighter that's getting better. The thing is with Vicente Luque, and the reason why he's going to be a popular underdog is he's been there, he's seen it all, he's fought like pretty much every great fighter that the UFC has seen since he's been in the UFC. Like, Vicente Luque was an absolute stud at one point, dominant in wars, knocking people out, dangerous, hard low kicks. It's just that type of style takes its toll on you over time. And I think that's what we're seeing with Luque. We're starting to see Luque, in my opinion, just decline a little bit, which is the reason why he's fighting a Themba Gorimbo and not somebody in the top 3 in the division. So for me, Luque could start to be this gatekeeper type of fighter where you've got to beat him to get to the next stage. And I think that's exactly where we're at with Themba Gorimbo. If Gorimbo doesn't beat Vicente Luque, then Gorimbo's not destined for the top of the division, at least not right now. And it's not as if he's a young 23, 24-year-old where he's got time to develop. But if Themba Gorimbo does beat Luque, then yeah, we can start talking about him at the top of the division. I just feel that with Vicente Luque, like, he loses fights against the types of style that Themba Gorimbo is. And look, I'm going to reference the Belal Muhammad fight, and I know that Belal Muhammad is in a completely different level to Themba Gorimbo. Belal Muhammad's the champion, he's looking dominant, he's looking, career best. But when Vicente Luque is getting taken down, he doesn't have too many answers if he's got a blanket on top of him. And I think that Themba Gorimbo's a good blanket on top of opponents. The one area that I think Gorimbo's got to be really careful with here, though, is when he's chain wrestling against the cage. If he leaves his neck anywhere exposed, then Vicente Luque's got some of the nastiest front chokes, the anacondas, the Darce chokes. Like, he will get Gorimbo. He will lock that up and he will tap Gorimbo if he gets that, if he gets a solid front choke. So Themba Gorimbo's got to mind his P's and Q's that on these takedowns, he's not leaving his head exposed to one of these front chokes that Luque will lock up. And I'm telling you, Luque's submitted better jiu-jitsu guys than Gorimbo with the front choke. So yeah, for me, that's the big issue for Gorimbo. I actually think from a striking perspective, Gorimbo has probably got more power than Luque right now, and maybe got more durability as well with the wars that Luque's been in. I understand why Themba Gorimbo's the favourite. I also understand why money came in on Luque when Gorimbo was out at -200. I get it, but I think the line's settled probably where it should be right now. And I think that, look, I don't think it's going to be an easy fight for Gorimbo, but I think that regardless of how you analyse this fight and how it gets played out in your head, I think when one fighter's getting his hand raised at the end of this fight, I think it's going to be Gorimbo. I think he's just going to do enough, even if it's just one of these dead boring fights, actionless, where, there's a lot of time held against the cage. I just think Gorimbo's going to do enough in this fight, and as long as he keeps his head out of that front choke opportunity for Vicente Luque, I think he's fine in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Themba Gorimbo to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one of my favourite fights on the entire card from a stylistic perspective, and yeah, it's one that I'm really, really looking forward to. We've got Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. And like I say, from a stylistic perspective, it's so intriguing because you've got Movsar Evloev, who, is that Russian wrestler with really good takedowns, pressure fighter, will keep shooting takedowns at you if he needs to. He's got good cardio as well, so he can do that for the full fight. And then you've got Aljamain Sterling on the other hand, who's absolutely no slouch in the wrestling himself. He's got a wrestling background. This is a guy that was taking down Olympic gold medalist Henry Cejudo. And I know there was a difference in size, like Cejudo was much smaller and, much lighter than Movsar Evloev, but still, Aljamain Sterling was the one taking down the Olympic wrestler. So, from a wrestling perspective, like, Aljamain Sterling can definitely be competitive with the best in the world. But then what's more interesting is Sterling's the one that's got the heavy BJJ game. So, yes, Evloev's grappling game is good. Of course, it's got to be good if you're that type of wrestler. But Sterling's grappling game is like elite, like he's a legit MMA grappler, a legit BJJ player. So Evloev has got to be careful if he's shooting in takedowns because, again, Sterling's got very good BJJ. Now, the thing is with Evloev has given moments to opponents in previous fights when it comes to the grappling. Like, he was caught in a couple of submissions against Diego Lopez on Diego Lopez's short notice debut in the UFC. And of course, Lopez turned out to be a phenomenal fighter, but that was still a short notice debut for Diego Lopez. Even going back to Evloev against, Mike Grundy. Like, Grundy had moments in that fight. And you look at the takedowns, it was Grundy that was getting takedowns on Evloev, not the other way around. And Grundy had moments against Evloev. Then you look at the Arnold Allen fight. Even Arnold Allen had a slight moment at the end of that fight from a submission perspective as well. So this is the thing with Movsar Evloev. Like, he gives moments to fighters from a submission perspective, just getting caught in something. Now, the other thing with Evloev is the dude's got like world-class submission defense. So, and if he didn't have that world-class submission defense, he would have been submitted by now because one of those three would have got him in regards to Lopez, Grundy, and Allen. He would have been got at least once if he didn't have this world-class submission defense. So, the thing is though, having world-class submission defense is great, but at some point you're gonna come against a fight and you are gonna get caught in that moment. And I'm not saying that's gonna be Sterling. What I'm saying is, from a stylistic perspective, this fight is super, super intriguing because Sterling can match the wrestling of Evloev. Sterling's got the grappling upside here. And then from a striking perspective, I think it's actually quite close. Like, both of them are a little bit awkward striking, and they're not like the highest level MMA strikers, but they're both super competitive striking and will be with the entire division. So it's just a very, very interesting fight. I think it's so closely matched. I think that, look, I wouldn't be shocked if Evloev came in there, got takedowns on Aljo, sort of nullified anything that Aljo's doing from bottom, stopped him from getting back up. But look, we've seen fighters stand up against Evloev. It's not as if Evloev has 3 takedowns a fight, 1 in round 1, 1 in round 2, 1 in round 3, and doesn't need any more takedowns because he holds them down for the remainder of the round. Fighters get back up to the feet. And with Sterling's got the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu advantage in my opinion, and will be able to stand back up in this fight if he's taken down. So this is the thing. And then, does Aljamain Sterling get Evloev down? If he does, can Evloev get back up to his feet, or does he show his back whilst getting up to his feet? Doesn't show any respect to Sterling. I could see a potential scenario of where Sterling does get a takedown and Evloev thinks, right, I'm going to get back up, shows his back, shows no respect to Sterling, and Sterling takes his back, gets a body triangle, and holds him there for a lot of the round. Like, it's one of these fights that I'm having a real hard time to be that confident in a prediction, because, like I say, it's that closely matched. If you didn't watch the fight and you wake up on Sunday morning and you saw Movsar Evloev beats Aljamain Sterling by unanimous decision, are you surprised? Well, no, absolutely not. But if you wake up on Sunday after not watching the fight and see Aljamain Sterling beats Movsar Evloev, I'm still not surprised. Like, Sterling's an elite fighter, he's a former UFC champion. It's a really, really good fight. One that, I'm having a really hard time to be that confident in a prediction. But then when you look at the betting line, you've got Sterling that's a plus 200 dog. I think that line's crazy off. And again, that line could look like Movsar Evloev should have been a minus 500 favourite. This is what I mean. Like, either there's going to look like Sterling's got a tremendous amount of value at plus 200, or it's either going to be Evloev should have been minus 500. Take your pick, but from a straight pick and prediction perspective, as I said earlier on, when I think there's a close and competitive fight, I will pick more often than not the fighter that is the underdog. So for those reasons, I'm going to pick Aljamain Sterling to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another really good fight here. We've got Randy Brown versus Bryan Battle. Now, with Bryan Battle, I've got to give credit where it's due. Like, I consistently pick against the guy in pretty much every fight. I think I've only bet against him twice, I believe. I haven't looked into my record, but I'm sure it's only twice I've bet against him. So it's not as if, I've been wrong too many times from a betting perspective. But I pick against him pretty much every fight. And look, Bryan Battle keeps proving me wrong time and time again. And to be fair to him, he's turning into a very good fighter, like a difficult fighter to beat, and he deserves this step up in competition against Randy Brown. But it's not like one of these step ups where he's now facing and fighting a guy in the top 10. He's just taking that next level up in competition. Again, coming off a win against Kevin Jousset. It's just, again, like, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to be honest, like, I'm having a hard time picking Bryan Battle to win this fight. Like, you look at the Kevin Jousset fight last time out, and yes, he got the finish, and yes, he ended up looking quite impressive, but you look at all the in-between moments, like, there was no movement with the head off the centre line. Bryan Battle was getting hit by Kevin Jousset with straight shots. It's just that Bryan Battle was landing the harder shots than Jousset, and that's what it was. It ended up being a battle of attrition, like who was landing the harder shots, because they were both landing clean. There was no head movement on either side, and it was who gets at who first, who folds first, and it was Jousset that folded first. And I just feel that Bryan Battle, although he's improving and developing, and he's actually turned into a much better fighter than I thought he was going to turn into in the UFC, he's still got a lot of work to do, and he's stepping up now against Randy Brown, who's career best right now, in his prime, looking absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, he had a little bit of back and forth with Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, but look, dos Santos is a veteran of the game. He's a legend himself, is still super dangerous, and he's been in there with pretty much every good fighter that you can imagine. So he was gonna always be a good test for Randy Brown. But the thing is, before going into that fight, Randy Brown was like a minus 175 favourite, and now he's sitting at like what, plus 150, plus 160. I think even wider at some bookies. I think some bookies have even got him up to plus 180. So I just don't understand how you can go from minus 175 favourite against Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, win by unanimous decision, and then be a plus 150 to 180 underdog against Bryan Battle. Like, doesn't make too much sense to me from a betting perspective. But the thing is, like, you look at where Bryan Battle was getting caught against Kevin Jousset, and you put Randy Brown in that position, and Randy Brown, I think, lands much longer, straighter shots with more power behind them. I think he's more experienced. He's fought the better level of competition. Again, he's one of them where I think that, look, on the flip side, Randy Brown is normally got like a 4, 5, 6, 7 inch height advantage, reach advantage, and against Bryan Battle, that's not going to be there. Bryan Battle's actually quite tall and quite long himself, although you would imagine without seeing them both together that Randy Brown would be much taller and longer, but at least from what the statistics are telling me, it's going to be much even from that range perspective. So Randy Brown isn't going to have all that type of advantage that he has usually in his other fights. So maybe that's one thing that, sort of spooks Randy Brown a little bit here, the fact that he doesn't have the same advantages that he normally has in previous fights. But like I say, when it comes to making a pick and prediction here, I'm going to pick the guy that's got more experience, that's fought the better level of competition, that's not past his sell-by date, if you like, for a lack of a better phrase, and is looking career best right now. Like, Bryan Battle's also looking career best right now as well. So this is why it's like, it's good matchmaking and it's a good fight, but it's the step up that Battle needs. It's just, I think Randy Brown is better than what a lot of people are giving him credit for now. And I think there's maybe a little bit too much hype on Bryan Battle after what he did against Jousset. But then you look at the difference between Jousset and Brown, and there's light years difference between both of those fighters. So it's a big step up in competition for Bryan Battle, fighting an opponent that's looking career best, that's in his prime, and like I say, that's fought the better level of competition and been around for much longer with more experience as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Randy Brown to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chris Weidman versus Eryk Anders. Now, this fight was supposed to happen a couple of weeks ago. I think it got cancelled. Like, we got told it was cancelled on the broadcast, if I remember correctly. Like, both fighters weighed in. I think it was an illness maybe on Eryk Anders' side. So, obviously, it was an illness and nothing serious because it's been rebooked just a few weeks later. But the UFC were clearly wanted to see this fight happen. Now, I have already broken this fight down before. So, again, if you want that breakdown, you can go and get it from that event. I can't remember what event it was off the top of my head, but it is already broken down. But I will go over it just once again really quickly in this podcast for those that didn't listen to the previous episode. But look, this fight, it's a very hard fight to predict because you've got two aging fighters that are on the back end of the career, that are declining, that definitely are way past the prime. In my opinion, I think that's fair to say. And it's a really good, well-matched fight from the UFC. And I say this all the time. I hate to see the fighters that are declining get matched up against young, hungry animals that pack bungalows in the fists. Because, again, the fight goes the way you expect it to go. And it's just really shit to see a fighter that's a UFC veteran that is past the prime and is declining, that is close to the end of the career, take that punishment and that damage from the young, hungry prospect. But in this type of fight, you've got both of those fighters that have declined fighting against each other, which is exactly the types of fights that you want to see. It's just at this stage, I just don't know whether Weidman comes in and wrestles. If Weidman comes in and wrestles heavily, I think he wins this fight quite comfortably. but it's just how much do you trust Weidman to wrestle? Because there's been so many fights previously where I think, yeah, Weidman wrestles here and he gets the win, and then I bet Weidman to win the fight by wrestling and he just doesn't. He stands striking and loses. And then there's been other fights after that where I've thought, well, he didn't wrestle when he's supposed to have wrestled in that fight, so yeah, I'll take the other fighter this time. But then Weidman comes in that fight and shows how good of a wrestler he is. So I've just got, for me personally, I just have some trust issues with Weidman, and does he wrestle or does he not? And because of that, I can't be confident in picking Weidman to win this fight because I'm just not sure if he wrestles. If he does, then yeah, he beats Eryk Anders. But if he doesn't, I think Anders still packed. I think even at this stage in both the careers, Anders has the massive power upside. And I think he can hit Weidman. I think he can crack Weidman. I think he can hurt Weidman. And I know that Anders is going to come into this fight and look to knock Weidman out. That's what I am confident in. If I was confident in Weidman wrestling, I'd pick Weidman. But I'm not. What I'm confident in is Anders coming in here and trying to really hit Weidman as hard as he can and knock him out. And this is a fist fight. You're going to get punched in the face. So that's why I'm leaning on the side of Anders. For those reasons, I'm picking Eryk Anders to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun fight here between Cody Durden and Joshua Van. Now, talking about fighters and not knowing when and where they're going to wrestle, well, in comes Cody Durden. Like, Cody Durden at one point in the UFC was looking like a relentless wrestler that was constantly on the legs of his opponents and hitting 6, 7, 8 takedowns a fight and got the gas tank to do that for a full 15 minutes. And you're thinking, man, dude's a problem. But then recently he's looking like he's bailed on the wrestling and he's looking to knock his opponents out. So it's, what is Cody Durden going to do in this fight? Is he going to wrestle or is he going to stand and strike? And again, I think that whichever route that Cody Durden takes is going to be dependent on whether he wins or loses this fight, because I think if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Joshua Van is going to be slightly faster and I think he's going to be slightly effective with his strikes. I just don't know if Durden's going to stand and strike with Joshua Van. I think Durden's a lot smarter than maybe a lot of people give him credit for. I think his fight IQ is a lot greater than people give him credit for. He knows when he needs to wrestle and he knows when he needs to strike. And I think in this fight, I think deep down he knows that he has the best success if he goes in wrestling. The thing is, Joshua Van's been hurt before. He's actually been hurt a few times in numerous fights. He just tends to come back and win more often than not. And with Durden can pack a punch. So it wouldn't shock me for Durden to hurt Van or think that he can hurt Van and stand striking. But, you look at the bigger picture and Joshua Van gets stronger the longer the fight goes on. And if Durden goes for a striking-based fight and doesn't knock Van out and hurts him early, I think Van's going to come back and get at Durden late. So I do think, look, I'm going backwards and forwards with what I think Durden's going to do, but like I say, I think if he wrestles, he's got a very good chance of winning this fight. And from a striking perspective, I think he can win the early round, the round 1, by hurting Van, and then does Van get back and hurt Durden? Well, Durden's got good durability. Like, he's one of these tough motherfuckers in regards to, UFC fighters. Like, Durden's tough, mentally, physically, durability good. So, yeah, look, I'm struggling to pick a winner in this fight because I respect Van and what he can do as well. Like, he's a super lightning quick fighter. He packs power as well. Slow starter, grows into fights, a lot like what you see with like Petr Yan, for example. But I just don't know. That wrestling edge for me is leading me to pick Cody Durden, because I just think if he comes out relentlessly like he's done against Charles Johnson and other fighters in the UFC where he's scored multiple takedowns in fights, I think that's the way that he really gets at Van here, wears him down, drains his gas tank a little bit, slow start. If he starts slow and Durden strikes, maybe the game plan is to get at Van early with striking, and then when Van thinks he can come back in this fight, turn into a relentless wrestler. I think that'd be super smart to do, and that's the type of performance I wouldn't be shocked to see from Durden, because like I said, I do think that his fight IQ and his intelligence is greater than maybe some people give him credit for. Again, if Joshua Van wins this fight, I'm not going to be shocked. I suppose you can tell from the tone of my voice I'm not 100% sure here, but I am going to pick Cody Durden. I think that's what my gut's telling me to go for. I think he's a little bit smarter than we give him credit for. I think he's got more ways to win this fight. Like, I think he can mix things up and blend the wrestling in, or he could just be a relentless wrestler and win as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Cody Durden to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin. Now, this is another fighter that I'm really unsure about in regards to Michael Chiesa. Now, with Chiesa, he's a fighter that I've liked for a very long time. I love his style. I know some people won't like his style, but I do. I've traded cashing tickets and having tickets lost from a betting perspective on Chiesa as well. Like, I have bet him and won on him as an underdog, and I've also lost on him as well. So, like I say, he's been hit and miss in the UFC, but he's also had a very good career in the UFC. Now, the thing is with this fight against Max Griffin, I think Chiesa is just the way better mixed martial artist with his skill set. I think from a striking perspective, Griffin is probably more dangerous, but Chiesa can hang with the striking with some of the best in the division. And I don't believe Max Griffin is up there with those types of fighters. Like, he's not a top 10 fighter, whereas I think Chiesa could hang striking with some top 10 guys. But Max Griffin still has this aggressive nature. He does still pack power. Remember, once again, we're back with the old UFC gloves. So the punches are that favours Max Griffin in this type of fight. But the thing is with Chiesa, his wrestling's way better than Griffin's. I think his grappling's light years ahead of Griffin's as well. So Chiesa has got the most likely path to victory from both fighters. So for Max Griffin, his path to victory, keep the fight standing, strike, knock Chiesa out, or just damage him over 3 rounds, win a decision. That's the path to victory for Griffin. For Chiesa, get the takedown, get the fight down to the mat. But the biggest gap in skill for me is within the grappling. So that's why I think Chiesa's got the better path to victory here, the more likely path to victory. It's just the only problem with Chiesa is he's definitely got one foot out the door already. He's got jobs lined up outside once he's finished fighting with his, UFC broadcast work, his desk work, the analytical side. Like, Chiesa's set up with the UFC already, and I'm sure he'll take a lead if he doesn't have already a very dominant head roll in regards to the gym that he trains at as well. So he's got plenty going on for him outside the UFC. For him to have one foot out the door, and he's probably just getting the paychecks in, seeing his contract out, and I wouldn't be shocked to see Chiesa call it a day once his contract's done. And I'm not sure how many fights he's got left on that contract. This might be the last one, it might not be, but that's the only thing that causes pause for me, because I think Chiesa at this stage in his career, when you've got one foot out the door, you're maybe not as desperate to get that win as what other fighters are. And that desperation to get the win can turn fighters into, having this bulletproof steel mindset where, you can't be broken, you can't be beaten, and you'll keep coming and coming and coming. Whereas I think Chiesa just maybe doesn't have that mindset anymore because of what's going on. And look, this is just me speculating. There's no facts and there's no proof in what I'm saying. It's just I'm calling it as I'm seeing it. I think that Chiesa's got everything set up for himself once his career's done in MMA. And I kind of feel like, look, if Griffin does if he does step on the accelerator here, pedal to the metal, comes forward and starts winging hard at Chiesa, does Chiesa fight back as best he can and get that takedown and get the fight down to the mat? Or if he's dropped, does he get back up and with the heart of a lion keeps coming forwards and comes back in the fight? I just don't know whether that fire's there with Chiesa like it used to be. That's my only pause. But again, there's no factual information that proves that. This is just me giving an opinion from the years of watching this sport and analysing it myself and seeing this so many times before. What I do know, or what I do believe from a statistical perspective and from an analytical perspective, is Michael Chiesa's the better MMA fighter with the better path to victory. So that's why I'm picking Chiesa to win the fight. But like I say, I do have pause because of what we've seen previously with Chiesa maybe not having that fire and fight that he once had. Maybe he proves me wrong. I hope he does, because I really like Chiesa. I've been a fan of him for years. I love the style. I love, like I say, the transitions that he's had from moving up in weight and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I really like Chiesa. I really hope that he turns the clock back one more time for a win here. I'm picking Michael Chiesa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper. Now, Chase Hooper at minus 1,000, minus 1,100 in other spots is the biggest favourite on the card. Does he cover minus 1,000, minus 1,100? That remains to be seen, but does he win the fight? Yeah, look, I think that he's got a very good fight ahead of him here. Clay Guida, he's a dog. He'll always be a dog for as long as he fights. For as long as he's not retired, he's always going to give everything, all his heart, all his energy, all his effort, all the fire in himself in every single fight. He'll fight for your money and he'll give absolutely everything for the fans. But the thing is, the older he gets, the more susceptible he gets. And I just feel, look, it's a tough one because I'd love him to go out there and dominate Hooper. But look, even from a striking perspective where Hooper's had the holes in his game, like Hooper's starting to look decent from a striking perspective. Like he's not trying to do anything too crazy, but his fundamentals are getting good and he's just landing shots and he's able to hit his opponents with confidence now. So even that from Clay Guida's perspective, I think that Chase Hooper could potentially hit Guida with a straight punch and hurt him, rock him maybe, and put Guida on the back foot. But then with Guida's a wrestling heavy fighter, or he's got a wrestling background, and Guida will hit takedowns. But does he want to take Hooper down? Hooper's jiu-jitsu is so slick, it's so good. And I think that's probably what Hooper wants. If somebody said to Hooper, okay, well, Guida comes in there and looks to take you down all fight, are you happy with that? I think, Chase Hooper rubs his hands together and says, let's go. So, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one for Guida because I'm not sure he can keep the fight standing for long enough in this fight to be able to get off some good shots against Hooper. But even on the flip side of that, Hooper's striking's improving as well. So I at least think Hooper will be competitive on the feet striking, which then enables Hooper to finally get the takedowns that he wants. Now, I don't think Hooper's wrestling, his straight wrestling in regards to, your single legs, your double legs, I don't think that's going to be too easy to get on Guida, and I think Guida's going to be the better wrestler from that perspective. But Hooper finds ways to get fights down to the mat. It might even be strike long and strike into a body lock and then trip Clay Guida down, where you're sort of bypassing that traditional wrestling where Guida's really, really good, and then get on top of Guida. And Guida's had an issue throughout his entire career of submission defense. So again, that's a real worry for Guida against a fighter like Hooper that is so good at snatching submissions. The bottom line here is, does the fight hit the mat? Yes or no? I think yes. Does Hooper have success on top of Guida? Well, absolutely yes. I think the offensive grappling of Hooper versus the defensive grappling of Guida, I think that's the biggest gap in skill in this fight by a country mile, and that should lead to Hooper having a lot of success and either getting the ground and pound on Guida, but I think Hooper slides an arm under the neck and chokes Guida. So yeah, for those reasons I'm picking Chase Hooper to win this fight. And the final fight to break down on this podcast, which will be the first fight of the night in the heavyweight division, we've got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Lucas Bresky. Now, Kennedy Nzechukwu made his UFC heavyweight debut only a couple of months ago in October, where he finished Chris Barnett pretty quickly. And yeah, look, I don't think you can put too much stock into that win against Chris Barnett. And I'm sure that was the fight where Chris Barnett injured his leg jumping before the fight started, a little bit like what Ortega did when he fought Yair Rodriguez, I think it was. But yeah, Barnett was already injured. I think it was already a pretty much a mismatch anyway in regards to the skill set and the style of each fighter. So yeah, you can't put too much stock into that Nzechukwu win. Not trying to take the win away from him, of course, but yeah, Bresky's going to be a harder fighter for Nzechukwu than what Chris Barnett was, in my opinion. And as much as I love Huggy Bear, Chris Barnett, everybody knows how much I love Huggy Bear. He's one of my favourite fighters, entertaining to watch, and yeah, he's just a vibe. But I'm calling it as I see it. Now, again, back to this fight, the one thing that I do take away from that Nzechukwu and Chris Barnett fight is, man, Nzechukwu looks like an absolute unit up at heavyweight. He made his UFC heavyweight debut in that fight, and man, not having that weight cut to 205, Nzechukwu just looks absolutely huge at heavyweight, and I think he's going to have success. Whether he gets into the top 10, top 15, top 10, I'm not sure. But at this level, outside of the rankings, I think he's gonna be very, very tough to handle. And look, Lucas Bresky is a decent fighter. I don't think he portrayed the best with the outcome of him getting knocked out against Mick Parkin. I think he's better than that. He's a scrapper. He'll always be in a fight. He'll always come forwards and try and exchange. Like, he's not one of these heavyweights that will be low volume and just try and point fight like Bresky. Bresky comes to fight. It's just, I think Nzechukwu is going to have so many physical attribute advantages over him here. I think he's going to be taller, he's going to be longer, he's going to be stronger, he's going to be hitting him from range. So as Bresky's coming into range, he's going to be getting cracked. Then when he gets into range, look, Nzechukwu's got elbows as well. I think the way that Nzechukwu is really going to get got at in the heavyweight division is by someone that's going to, going to be a strong wrestler and a good topside grappler that will take him down and keep him down. But that's not Bresky's game. Bresky will try and stand strike in exchanges, but I think Nzechukwu is going to have the power advantage, the range advantage, and I just think he's going to hit Bresky at more ranges from different angles, and it's just going to be a tough one for Bresky, because before Bresky even gets into a situation where he can land on Nzechukwu, he's got to get through so much fire first, and that's going to be his problem. So for those reasons, I'm going to pick Kennedy Nzechukwu to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. It's gone on quite a bit longer than what I was anticipating, if I'm being honest. But look, there was 14 fights, so we're always going to head towards the hour mark, and then it's a pay-per-view as well. And I really love this card. There's been so many fights where I've expanded on the breakdown and analysis just because there's more pieces to it than normal, and I'm excited for a lot of these fights. So yeah, it's been a little bit longer. If you don't like it, then don't listen. I'm only joking. Please do listen. And also, if you are on YouTube as well, please subscribe to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. You'll get updates as soon as the podcast uploads to YouTube as well. So there's every benefit for you to do that. And of course, it benefits us at MMA Play 365 as well. So we really appreciate it. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, then feel free to come over to YouTube, where in the replies, in the comments, you can tell me who you're betting on. You can tell me where we disagree. Of course, come in, be kind. Everyone's opinion matters. Be arrogant, be a knob, and I'll probably not reply to you. But yeah, look, in all seriousness, I am busy throughout the weeks, but I always try and make time to come back to the comments. So yeah, if you're on one of the podcast platforms, come over to YouTube, drop a comment, let's have a discussion. Whilst you're over there, again, make sure you subscribe. And that's all from me. Just before I go, one last time, if you do want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. The subscription packages are super affordable. The prices aren't overpriced or inflated or anything like that. It's $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for the entire year. And our thesis is the prices are low, so you can make your money back from the bets from what you've paid for the subscription, so you can start profiting on your bets as quickly as possible. So yeah, that's it. We've got something for every type of gambler. Also, every package includes Base AI, our UFC prediction software, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.